Hello and welcome to the Last Looks podcast, a show where we catch up with talented hairstylists and makeup artists in the film and television industry. We'll pick their super creative brains and find out all the good stuff. Join me, your host, Jamie Lee, in finding out what's what in the hair and makeup departments around the world. Hey listeners of the Last Looks podcast, I just wanted to say a quick thank you for all your support over the last 3 seasons. I'll be honest, if no one was listening, I totally would have given up. And of course, a massive shout out to our incredibly talented guests. Thank you for your time, your knowledge, and sharing your journey with us all. It's been amazing. A quick note about the podcast moving forward. We will be releasing new episodes every 2 weeks this year instead of weekly, starting January 25th. I wish I could commit to weekly, but alas, you know how it goes when you're working on set. It will just become too much. I hate to say it, but it's true. Anyway, thanks again for tuning in, and remember to review the show on Apple Podcasts. And if you like the podcast, share it. Now, let's get on with the show.
And now, our feature presentation.
Today, I'm speaking with Marc Pilcher, the makeup and hair designer for the Netflix series everyone's talking about, Bridgerton. If you have seen the show, then you probably have a pretty good idea of what we're going to be chatting about. And if you haven't binged it yet, what are you waiting for? Binge it, smash it out, watch it, enjoy it, love it, pause it to check out the hairstyles, and then come back and listen to this episode.
Pictures up.
Last looks. Rolling.
And action.
Welcome to the Last Looks podcast, Marc.
It's lovely to meet you. Happy New Year.
Yeah, you too. Now, you are a makeup and hair designer for the Netflix series Bridgerton. For those that have not seen it yet, be sure to check it out. It is a beautiful sight indeed. Everything from the costumes and sets to the drama. And the reason we're here today, the makeup and the hair. So, Marc, I wanted to start at the very beginning. Tell me, how did you become involved in the project?
My agent had sort of put my details forward, but not heard anything back. And then a colleague of mine was, because of the way Bridgerton set up, because with the crowd of the society top, what they wanted, which is quite unusual with a piece like, well, with any piece really, to employ a crowd room where your essays come with you for whatever you do, because they wanted it to be the same debutantes and the same suitors, etc., the same mamas. So they basically kind of auditioned all the crowd in advance so that they could bring them with us. And a colleague of mine was asked to go and do some looks with the crowd because she knew the crowd AD. And at the time, they didn't have a makeup designer. They'd had trouble finding someone. And she basically put my name forward. And it just so happened that nearly everyone that in costume that was involved in these fittings, I'd worked with on my last 2 jobs. And they all went, oh no, you've got to have Marc. So, I didn't know the costume designer, Ellen, before this. So they put my name forward to her, and she looked at my website and loved my work. And it kind of went from there, really. So it came from totally out of the blue.
That's amazing. And I guess a few people dropped your name, so they must have kept hearing it and gone, I think we need to speak to this Marc Pilcher. Sure,
yeah.
It's amazing. So how long did it shoot for, and where were you guys filming?
I think it was about 9 months with prep. And the way it worked out, I think because what happened was because it ended up starting later than it was supposed to. Mm-hmm. So I think originally in each block, we were supposed to do location, studio, and because we started later and the piece is set in the summer, the society ton of the summer, they needed to get everything done in advance. So we ended up doing all the location stuff first. So we were in Bath, York, Salisbury. We went up to the beautiful Castle Howard up in York, various stately homes around London, all those beautiful locations that you see in film. So we did all that up until just before Christmas. And then after Christmas, we went back and did all the studio stuff. These amazing sets built by Will Hughes-Jones. Yeah. Absolutely breathtaking sets. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely. And how much prep did you get before filming started?
I had, I think, 6 weeks prep.
Didn't feel like enough, I'm sure.
No,
Yeah.
it never does. It never does. And, and of course, later on, we hadn't come up with the idea at the beginning of prep with the Queen. It was a much later thing that we sort of decided that because she didn't really have anything else left in her life, she's basically waiting for her husband to die. All she does is sit around the house and play with, her dogs. And so we just came up with this idea that because she's so bored, every time you see her in a new dress, that she would have a new wig. And obviously, if we'd have thought about that beforehand, we could have had a lot more prep, or we could have had, at least some more ideas. But because we only came up with that idea once we'd started filming, we then had to sort of prep her wigs as we went along, which was, a huge add-on to already our filming days.
Yeah, but I think you pulled it off, Mark.
I
think you did okay. That's amazing. So going back to what you said earlier about like doing the fittings and everything with your crowd and, making sure that they had people returning, that's amazing. And I guess gives you also the opportunity to be able to know who's coming in daily to be able to design and get their looks sorted out in advance. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's one particular guy, I posted some pictures of him on Instagram the other day, who in the first week of fittings, this amazing looking black guy, just, some people just have a look that when you meet them, you go, I need to see you on camera. So I devised a look for him and made by hand all these beautiful dreadlocks. I call them dreadlocks. I think that the term you're supposed should use is locks.
I absolutely know who you're talking about because he definitely caught my eye and I was just like, wow, that is cool. He looked awesome.
I just wanted them to, I just wanted him to stand out. And so I created this look. And then on the first day of filming, said to the ADs, I said, can we make sure that we see Andre in shot? And boy, did we see him in shot. Interestingly enough, when I put this thing up on Instagram, a friend of mine put a comment saying, oh my God, we totally know, this guy. She said, me and my sister watched it and we ended up playing like Where's Wally, as where, because they could spot him in every they were like, oh, there he is.
Yeah. I think at first I was like, are those locks? And then you'd see him again and go, they are. And then you'd look again and you'd be like, I want a closer look at the detail on that. They look so cool. And I did actually see your Instagram post to be able to have a better look at them. And it's very cool.
And also I wanted to sort of introduce the sort of bleached sort of beach, it's almost surfery looking ends, just to give them definition so you would really spot them. And, along with the gold cuffs as well. Although Absolutely. I don't know if costume were always happy with me for doing that, because obviously they've been fitted with quite a few tight hats, like lovely top hats, and sometimes Dougie from costume, we can't get the hats on. But I was really lucky to have a core team in the crowd room, which was kind of, quite often on a film you're allowed, 2 or 3 core people, but we had, I think 6 or 7, which was amazing, because I don't think we could have done it without. You needed those people that were there all the time because they were constantly, building, making wigs, pieces for, and doing fittings for the next location. So, I was really lucky to have such a great team there.
Absolutely. I mean, on your bigger crowd days, how many people would you have with you?
I think we probably at the most had about 50 in the crowd. Wow. There could be, I wasn't booking the numbers those days, so there could have been more than that, but I would say about 50 probably at most. Yeah.
And is everyone doing hair and makeup, or does it get a little separated?
Yeah, sometimes you have a mixture. Sometimes, it's really good to have people that do both, but sometimes as well for time-wise, it's good to have somebody, where they could have their hair prepped or set, then go to makeup, then go to costume. I always think it's really good to have a real mixture of abilities in the crowd room.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you had 6 kind of full-time crowd artists with you, how many were on your team looking after main cast?
There were 8 of us full time, but then we pretty much nearly always had 2 or 3 extra because of the sheer volume of the work. I mean, some mornings when we had our big days, if I had, say, 6 actors in, I would start at 5:30 and I would finish my last makeup at midday without breakfast. And if two or three of you are doing that, you need somebody to go and look after the guys that have already gone to set. So we were lucky enough to always have a few extra people to help out there. So generally, I would say there were probably about 10 to 12 of us on the main bus.
Wow, that's amazing. And what are you looking for when you're putting a crew together for a job like Bridgerton?
I suppose, like any designer, abilities for whatever you pick people that, like you were saying, not everyone does both. So if I have somebody on the team that mainly does hair, then you need somebody who can probably do both, but do the makeups for, say, Adam, who does the Queen's wigs. He only does hair. So what I did a lot of the time was I doubled him up with Claire, who does both. And what I did was she did certain people like Lady Violet and Genevieve, and did both the hair and makeup on them. But the rest of the time, she would just do the makeups for Adam.
That's awesome. So just, figuring out who can fit in where and look after who.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously needing some talented hands in there, because the work you guys were producing was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So had you worked with everybody before, or?
Yes. I only like to work with people I've at least worked with once before, because I always find the makeup truck, it's almost like, for the actors, it's almost not like going to a spa. It's the one place they go to before set. You become very close with your actors. We touch, obviously pre-COVID, we touch their skin and it's the one place where there's always going to be like tears or something like that. And it has to be, I like to have a really sort of zen kind of happy room. So I always prefer to work with people that I've worked with before, so that I know who they are. Yeah,
I think it's having people who have a good temperament and just vibe, as well as the talent, right? I mean, you need a good balance.
Yeah. Well, because I think on a long job like this, you become a family, basically. You're away together for, 9 months. And like I said, the first part, we were always on location. So you literally are away from home. So, I just like to create that family atmosphere and just a fun, happy atmosphere as well. I mean, my dog came on, we had my dog on the bus. He was a puppy at the beginning of the job. So he came along and became the show's mascot. And he used to sit on the guys' laps while they were being made up. And so,
That's awesome. I love hearing that. I think that family vibe and everyone getting on, it just helps the cast as well. If they're walking into a happy environment first thing in the morning, it starts their day off right, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I had really good juniors and trainees as well. I don't like departments where all the trainees and juniors, all they get to do is the paperwork. I like them to at least look after 2 or 3 people. So, and, because I've worked with them before, I knew their abilities. So all my juniors and trainees made up certain actors, and, which was great. It's great for them to start their careers off and being able to see that they were part of the production and see how great their work is. So that was brilliant for me, I think.
Yeah, I think so. It gives them that thirst to kind of keep going and do better. And I think it's awesome.
Yeah. So many trainees become so brilliant at the paperwork and the computer stuff, and then they become so invaluable. But then people think, oh, well, I'll just keep them doing that. Then they become secretaries, rather than makeup artists. So it's good to make sure they get their, hands in, early on.
It's not what they signed up for. It's like, I don't want to do this forever.
No.
But then you end up going back to that when you start heading the departments and designing. You got to do a bit of go back and do a bit of paperwork. So when you started the design process, did you already know that you would have a little more creative freedom with the project? Like it's that realm of fact and fantasy. And I mean, were there certain guides that you had as far as the Julia Quinn books, like which the series was based?
I mean, I hadn't actually read the books, so I only read the script. I haven't read the books, but there were. Yeah. I know when I started into it that costume were talking quite heavily about a fashion-y side to it, but the producers were always it must be period as well.
Right.
So it's that thing of trying to balance the two. And although I don't think we necessarily did a fashion or certainly not a modern high, fashion look, but what I try to do when I start the fittings, you do your research, you look at your books and your paintings at the time. And I always like to draw from my knowledge of old movies. And so I would go to the early fittings and say characters like Lady Featherington in the fitting, her costumes, even though they were of the Regency style, they were quite clearly heavily influenced by 1950s. I know Ellen had been to the Christian Dior exhibition at the V&A at the time. So, all those big floral prints and the necklines are all very 50s. So obviously I was like, well, I'm going to keep it obviously Regency, but if she's going to have a 50s feel, then I want to give her a slightly 50s look. So I then decided that she would be like a redheaded Elizabeth Taylor sort of Deborah Kerr character. So although we kept the silhouette of the Regency style and the main shape of it, I gave her this very sort of 1950s fringe at the front just to sort of tie in with the costumes. I always think it looked strange if her costumes looked 50s, but we made her look totally Regency. So that it's really nice because it gives you the balance and it gives you the idea to just not make it look like every other thing you've seen before. You just put your little mark on it and just make it a little different. Some people will like that, some people will hate it, but it just that things like that evolve, and then if the actors like it and the producers and everyone else, then you're onto a winner basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And it must be nice to kind of have something to jump off, something to bounce off, and that being the costume designer kind of putting that first little mark in there for you to then kind of grow from there, which is awesome.
Yeah. We were also very lucky with the costume. I mean, Ellen, I absolutely adored the costume designer, but one of the things I loved her for the most was the fact that she hates bonnets. And obviously Regency period is a very bonnety period, which when you're a hairstylist and you make these beautiful creations and that a huge bonnet is going to go on and cover the whole thing. And so she made these amazing little, they were almost like a hint, a nod to a bonnet. So it would be like half a brim that came around, which again quite often looked quite 50s. So it just meant you could build a hairdo around that. So that, again, was just fantastic to have that scope.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, my goodness. I know. That is heartbreaking when a hat goes on top of something.
And, there's that thing that it looks good. That there's a reason why the combination is great. But sometimes you're like, well, can we not just leave the hat off today?
Yeah, it's looking really good. Can we just leave it?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I wondered if we can go through some of the characters, and I might just refer to them with their character names instead of cast names, just so myself and others don't get too confused. But how about we start with the Bridgertons themselves? I mean the brunette family, I will call them. And am I correct in thinking that in the grand scheme of like that family design that they're a little more, I don't want to use the word simple, but they're kind of more downplayed than some of the other families that are very...
Yeah. So, the Bridgertons, to me, they were from the very start, the Featheringtons were always sort of described to me as the sort of the Kardashians kind of thing, the new money, whereas the Bridgertons are, old landed gentry, probably related to the royal family, So from the start, in my mind, they should be elegant and simple and class personified, whereas then with the Featheringtons you've got that scope to go outrageous. So Daphne was based on Audrey Hepburn in War and Peace, because I looked up images. I knew I'd seen that film before, and just Phoebe had that sort of beautiful elfin face and the fabulous eyebrows. So I just instantly thought of Audrey and her hairstyles in War and Peace. And obviously that was made in the 50s, but again was a Regency style film. So obviously you see the influences of the 50s, but still keeping to the Regency look. So that was my inspiration for Daphne.
Daphne kind of goes through a little bit of a transformation too, doesn't she, with her fringe, like her little... What are those called? Those little cute curls that kind of come in on the fringe?
Two sort of pin curl things.
Yeah. Do they have a name?
Well, I would call them a pin curl, I suppose. But
okay.
Yeah.
It's such a definite fashion situation, isn't it? It's cute.
Yeah. And I think in the original fittings, she started off with, I sort of designed her with a much more, slightly fuller fringe. Even though it was short, it was a fuller fringe. But Chris, the producer, wanted to sort of start softening her up, which is why it then got split to one side. And then in the later episodes, we introduced more sort of fringe, the sort of the softer tendrily bits of hair coming down, just to sort of soften her, to go with the story. Everything with hair and makeup, I think, is good to tell a story. So that's why we introduced, the softer bits there with Daphne.
That's awesome. I'm just guessing here, but was it like a 3/4 wig of sorts? So you're using her own nape area?
Yes, I mean it was pretty much a full wig, and we literally just used to use her nape in the back, and we had various switches and hair pieces to add and a million hair jewels. And in episode 3, where we have there's the scene where she sweeps down the staircase to Prince Frederick. That the brief there had always been in the script was the fact that she has to look breathtaking and the whole room gasps as she enters. So that's when I wanted to take her away from the sort of tight little, simple hairdos, which always look beautiful, but we just wanted to literally change her totally for that scene, which is why we did the sort of look at the tumbling curls, which I think worked. She looked beautiful, absolutely beautiful as she came down the stairs. Yeah.
And Eloise, she was one of my favourites, I have to say. Just her character, little feminist in the making, I think.
Yeah. And I think people, a lot of people wouldn't know that in the Regency period, a lot of people want a hairstyle that was probably not worn by everyone, but there's lots of evidence in portraits and pictures. The mullet was quite a big thing in Regency London, and that's why I had the idea when I started reading the script, because she was such a sort of tomboy feminist type, and she who hates the constraints of the corsets and being made to get glammed up. Yeah. I came up with the idea that she should have this little mullet sort of hairdo, which we would still, she still had to look pretty. I still gave the Grecian influence of the ribbons in her hair, and it also had to be a length that we knew, because later on in the storyline, there's the scenes when her mother makes her go to the ball and look like Daphne. So we knew that it had to be long enough to still, if we added pieces, turn her into a little mini Daphne, but but still keep that lovely free mullet for her, feminist ways. So that was my sort of works on Eloise.
That's great to hear that, because I will say, I think because I haven't studied that period and not knowing that's amazing to hear, because when I first saw her come on screen, I was just like, whoa, that hairstyle's different to everybody else in the room. But it absolutely grew on me very quickly, and especially when she had the little ribbons in there, and then just seeing her transition later as well. So it's awesome to hear where that idea came from. That's cool.
Yeah. And also it's, when you're working with the actors and you're forming those looks, I came up with that idea in early prep, and Claudia, who played Eloise, was instantly like, oh my God, I love it. Like, I think when an actor's still, they're also trying to form their ideas of it, to give them a little something like that. She was like, you've made me feel like I'm Eloise instantly. And then, of course, we had to sort of introduce the idea to the producers, hoping that they would sort of agree with our, as anything, with any look, you have to sort of get the okay from above. And they really liked it. So, and she just loved it. It became her. She just used to sometimes cry at the end of a makeup call, but in a good way, because she was so happy.
Such a wonderful story.
Harriet used to do that too as well.
Oh my goodness. That's awesome. So Lady Violet, she always looked elegant and not too showy and this.
Yes. So. And again, they wanted her very, not curly, because in a lot of these sort of this period drama, the mother would be made sort of quite fussy and with lots of curls, whereas they wanted her to still, because the idea was that with all the mothers in this piece, they're still really young mothers. They're not, the old grand dame. So they were like, she has to look like the cool mum So that's why we kept her really simple and just elegant. And, Ruth has the best cheekbones in the world. So, that instantly just a little blush and she looks amazing. So,
yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And the Bridgerton boys. Now, I am amazed. All brunettes, all handsome looking guys.
Yeah.
But you managed to give them all individual styles. They all did look very different from each other, which is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, from day one, they always said, that Colin should be slightly more flamboyant. So that's why he ended up with that fabulous quiff. And, with Johnny, the brief, they wanted him to look hot. So hopefully he looked hot. Johnny is Anthony.
Yes. Okay, cool.
Yes. And also, I think the thing that helps with that period is men wore rouge.
Right.
So even though we didn't sort of make it, overplay it like you would, I don't know, say with the new romantics of the 1980s, all the boys, they all had a little bit of rouge and tiny little bit of guy liner as well, if we could get it in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's very cool. So how did you go about styling most of the men's hair in general? I mean, from cast through to crowd room, there seems to be a fair amount of wave and texture and things like that.
So we would use a lot of sea salt spray, just to give it texture. So I would use sea salt spray and mousse, and we would blow dry them, and then a tong, good old tong. And then most of them if they hadn't grown their own sideburns, we would then add false sideburns as well, because that was a look of the period, and then just dress them out. I mean, most guys' makeup calls were sort of 30 to 40 minutes. So yeah. And like you say, we try and sort of, even though it was quite a look for that period, as in most times, to look the same, you want to do an individual little slant on each one. So, and again, with Luke that played Benedict, again, I wanted him to be a little bit more, because he gets into, he meets the arty crowd. So I wanted him to be a little more arty looking, which I hope we achieved.
Yeah, looks great. They're a good looking bunch of boys. And little Hyacinth, I mean, she was just self-explanatory, really, wasn't she? She was just a young, cute, curly, with some headbands and things. Yeah.
Yeah. And a beautiful little, we all, the first time we all met, we were like, oh my God, this little girl, she's going to be a stunner in a few years' time when she's, grown up. She was so, she looked so cute as Hyacinth. Yeah.
Yeah. She was great too. I loved her character. She was always asking after the prince.
Always asking questions. Yeah.
So let's move on to the Featheringtons, the redhead family. So you explained a little bit about, is it Portia Featherington?
Portia.
Portia? Oh, Portia.
Portia, yeah.
Beautiful. Now, was she wearing a wig as well?
She was wearing a wig, yes. And again, Adam, who did the Queen's wigs, did Lady Featherington's wigs, and Claire did her makeup. And so she had a wig, again, with her. We used to use her own nape in the back. And then Adam made these, amazing creations of these beautiful basket weaves. And he made, leaves of hair. And he made this... I mean, you've probably seen the pictures on Instagram. There's some breathtaking butterfly that was made all of hair.
Incredible.
So she would always have a little extra piece on top, for certain occasions, for the big occasions. Yeah, she was great to create. And as I said, we kept the 50s thing going. Absolutely. There was one thing, I would never know whether you should mention these things, but there was a thing in the script at the beginning that she has a rash in her hairline, and at one point we revealed her sort of lifting her hairline and looking at the rash, and of course, with time you can't always fit every little bit of storyline in.
No.
But because she had this rash, she then whatever happened, you always saw her scratching her head. So, which now almost looks like she just had this sort of nervous tic, but actually we actually created this lovely rash in her hairline, which actually never got to be seen, unfortunately. But it just looked like she had this crazy nervous tic that she was always scratching her head.
That's awesome. Well, it's awesome that it worked out and people weren't like, what's she doing? That it just seemed a natural little
Yeah,
little
I
tip.
don't think people would think. It just, she was always
No.
sort of ruffling hair, but obviously she was scratching the rash that wasn't there in the end. But
And would I be right in saying that her makeup was a little more heightened, like her eyebrows were a bit more defined and things?
yes, again, just to sort of going with I mean, she's got amazing eyebrows anyway. So,
Incredible.
but to sort of go with the 50s feel as well, it just sort of helps to heighten the makeup a little bit. Yes, and also, the mothers always generally had a little bit more makeup.
And then the sisters three, who have got Philippa, Prudence, and the cutest Penelope ever.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, with all the girls, with most of the girls in this, these are girls who are playing teenagers. So, and especially with Penelope, because she's only supposed to be 15. So I wanted to make sure that she looked, as girly as possible, because, over when it comes to the other, series 2 or 3 or whatever, she's obviously going to, turn into a woman. So it's nice always keeping a story, making a story with the hair and makeup, and just making sure that she looked as sweet and girly as possible. So that's why she was always sort of ringlety, and we actually added little freckles just to make her look really cute, and and her lovely pale complexion. Whereas the other girls, they were like, we used to call them the ugly sisters. They're not ugly at all because they're two beautiful girls. But, that's what you think of when you think of Prudence and Philippa. They're sort of always, teasing each other and, and doing the comedy element. Those two girls together are naturally funny when they're off camera anyway. So,
Yeah.
and Philippa, actually, again, I looked after Philippa. And as it wasn't really for any reason. It just kind of evolved. But her look, even though, again, it was Regency, it sort of evolved into a slightly 1940s. And we used to use a lot of little flowers in her hair that just worked with her. I think it just worked with her complexion and her look. She just ended up with this slightly 1940s Regency look. I don't know why. It just kind of happened.
Yeah. I think it was also beautiful just to see so many redheads on screen. I love a redhead on screen. So that was really nice. And then the lovely Marina Thompson character, the Featherington's guest. I loved how you kept with the actress's, what's her name, Ruby? Her own hair texture, which was...
Yeah, because they always wanted, the brief with her was always that she's a country girl. Mm-hmm. She's come from the country, even though, she wasn't, she's not from a poor family, but we wanted to make it look like, she wasn't there to be, dressed and, teased and made to look like the other girls. So she would always, keep that lovely, soft, natural look. And it was great because another little inspiration of mine was, I don't know if you've ever seen there's a Barbara Streisand film called On a Clear Day You Can See Forever. And in that film, Barbara she's basically being hypnotized to stop smoking, and through the hypnotism ends up finding all these past lives. And one of her characters in it is from the Regency period. She has this amazing hairdo that they did at the time of curls, and as soon as I saw that silhouette, I just thought, oh my god, that's Marina. So when you see that huge mass of afro curls when she has that, that goes back and up, that was sort of inspired by Barbara in this old movie. So yeah.
Oh, I love that.
And Ruby's so naturally pretty as well. We didn't want to load her down with makeup as well, so she had very soft, light makeups.
Yeah, she looks absolutely stunning. And now, so there's the blondes. Cowper ladies, mother and daughter. There was the braids and the bows and the ringlets, and I just, oh my goodness, it was amazing.
So my thing with Cressida was I likened her to, I don't know if you ever used to watch Little House on the Prairie when you were a kid. Do you know that series?
I do know the series, but I do not believe I watched it, but I do know what it is. Yeah.
So there was a character in that called Nellie Olson who was pretty. Her mother she was blonde, and her mother always used to do her hair in ringlets. So she was really pretty and girly and sugary sweet on the outside, but on the inside she was really horrible and bitchy. And so that was my idea with Cressida, was that she would always look so lovely and demure and lots of flowers and ribbons, but inside was this, horrible person. So, and it kind of, again, Cressida, I looked after her, and I kind of just went to town, really. I didn't mean, it just, some of her do's just got bigger and bigger, but they seemed to work for her. And, again, she loved everything we did. So yeah, the hair bows and the hair ribbons. And then in episode 3, there's a scene where they have the ball where Daphne comes down the stairs. And by that point, Cressida had obviously set her sights on the prince. And so I came up with an idea that she would have this hairdo made again of the braided wire. So I did everything, a lot of her hairdos, all those basket weaves were braided with wire. And then you would sew ribbons through and sew pearls onto them. And I just came up with this idea that because she had her mindset on the fact that she wanted to be his princess, that she'd got her mother to get her hairdresser, her maid, to basically make this hairdo that looked like a crown, so that he could see, he could see what she would look like as his princess. So that was my little idea with that. And then what we always used to try and do, again, Adam and Claire did Lady Cowper, and I would synchronize with them. And we would always try and if Cressida was going to have bows, then her mother would have bows. If Cressida had flowers, then mum's. So that it was almost like that they were constantly plotting to get them. So they would, almost like be working all day long to achieve their looks for the evening. And of course, it actually, I think, mentions in the script that they're actually the wealthiest out of all the families. So even though, they have the money to do those things all the time.
Yeah, I mean, and both ladies could pull it off so well. They just looked stunning. So that's awesome. And now the woman that we all look forward to gracing our screens, because you know that hairstyle would have been a different creation every time, and that's Queen Charlotte. So talk me through some of those incredible looks. I mean, she was a little bit more, like her lip colour was more pronounced, and she had the beauty mark and things like that as well with her makeup. So
yes. Yeah, because obviously the Queen was from that, at this point in period, the Regency. So basically, what happened was you had your sort of 1700s where the big powdered wigs were around. They were the high fashion, and then basically the government introduced this thing called the powder tax. So they basically put a tax on powder. Because everyone you would have your wig and then you would put the powder on to disguise the smells and this, that, and the other. And so then all of a sudden, because people went, oh, well, I don't want to pay that, they decided, I don't want to wear wigs anymore. So that's why all of a sudden people stopped wearing wigs if you were wealthy. Wow. And the Regency hairdos came along. But, the Queen is from that older time where people so much, didn't necessarily want to change with the fashion. So that's why we kept her looking, a few years, fashion behind. And so, that's why she has the beauty spots, because they would be very common then. And with the Queen, when I did my research, obviously from that period, there aren't many portraits of people of African descent in, a rich household or with those powdered wigs, even though actually Queen Charlotte, when you research her, she was what they think of African descent, but it's never sort of been proven. And you can see in the portraits that she clearly has African features there. So what I wanted to do was, rather than just copy the silhouettes of those wigs of the period, I decided I wanted to introduce her ethnicity into it and have the locks and the afro and the braids, and basically just create our look of how we think she should have looked. And again, it just makes it more fun. It makes it more exciting. We would work with Golda, and, again, episode 3, I came up with the idea of there was the look of the time, which was the Gainsborough look, which instead of the high powdered wigs was a much wider look. And again, I just thought, wouldn't it be fun if we made her look like Beyonce introduced an element of Beyonce from Austin Powers into it. So that's why we went with that huge afro, and it had the sort of golden ends to it, just like Beyonce.
Yeah, it was glorious. She walked in and I was just like, oh, yes. It just got real.
I mean, that was one of those times where you sit there and you go, have I gone too far this time? Have I gone too far?
Well, I'm sure someone would have told you, no?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing that you had that flexibility and to be able to go to those creative places. That's amazing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. No, we were really lucky, and everyone went with it. We would always sort of show everything to Chris beforehand and say, he'd be like, "What's the Queen got today? What's she going to look like this week?" We'd be like, "Well, and he would
I
always
love
love them.
the natural afro texture through the hairline on some of those
Yes.
wigs. That was kind of
Yeah.
through. It was beautiful.
Yes, and we actually had at the beginning a wig made, which you see in some of the scenes, which was just a natural afro wig for her sort of almost downtime. So if she wasn't at a function, we would style that into like a small Gainsborough style, and that was literally just supposed to be her own natural hair, as opposed to the others, which were very definite wigs.
Yeah. And how did you choose the different colours for the wigs?
We would basically, at the beginning of each block, we would have meetings with costume, and they would have little swatches and designs for what her costume would be for each ball on that block. So then I would go and source through my wigs and just choose a color that would match the costume. And then quite often, that amazing white wig at the end, which is all the locks and the bows and the bird cages, costume then made, because I wanted people with locks would quite often wear little cuffs, like with the essay that we spoke about earlier, Andre. I made him these little gold cuffs. And so costume actually made these beautiful jeweled cuffs that matched her necklace and her earrings, so that the whole ensemble together would just look amazing.
Yeah, it was incredible.
We were really lucky because, they didn't have, that was an added thing for them to do on top of all the thousands of things they had. But, so Sophie, who was running the department at the time, was amazing that she just sort of went, yep, we'll do that. That'll look great. So, yeah, we were really lucky.
Yeah, that teamwork, it's worth it.
Yeah.
Goodness, collaboration. So much fun.
Totally.
Golda, the actress, she must have just absolutely loved what you guys were doing, I assume. She was...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And quite often we wouldn't sort of let her see things until literally it went on her head, especially that white wig at the end, and even the big Beyonce one. We would sort of say, we're going to do you an afro, but we wouldn't actually let her see them. So just because she would get really excited.
Oh my goodness!
And some of them she there's a wig, a black braided wig that she wears in the opera box, and that wig actually came from an idea of Golda's herself. One day she said to Adam, she said, I'd love to have, those, I don't, there must be a name for them and I should know it, but I don't. The big scarves that the African ladies wear to church, those beautiful, they're sort of layer upon layer of batik. And Golda said, she said, I would love to have one of the wigs that was sort of shaped like one of those scarves. So we got drawing and we actually, when on the final thing, we added sort of gold leaf to sort of give definition of where each bit of the scarf would be, and also to almost give it that sort of batik kind of fabric look to it. So, so she used to get quite involved sometimes in the, we would always sort of even if we didn't let her see it, we would discuss it with her beforehand. So she always sort of knew what was coming up, but even if she didn't know it by sight.
That's very cool. So do you have any kind of tips and tricks for those that are listening to make sure your cast are comfortable throughout a shooting day when they're carrying so much on their heads sometimes? What kind of...
Yeah, most of the time they should be pretty straightforward and they shouldn't be a bad thing to wear. But obviously the Queen, some of those, there's one wig in particular, which was another with the black braided one, which I don't know if you remember, had this ginormous silver tiara on. I think she wore it to the wedding breakfast. And that was the heaviest of all the wigs. And we would make sure that whenever she was off camera, if she was going to be off camera for, half an hour or lunch, we did it in a way that she'd be able to take the wig off, and we would store it on a block on set, and, knowing that we could just pop it back on when we came on. Because, otherwise, if you're already wearing a corset and then you've got this ginormous wig and that's constricting your neck, it's not a good thing. And then what we did was we made sure that when we made the white wig at the end, which wasn't quite as tall but could have been equally as heavy, we did it in a way that we made it much more hollow on the inside, so that it wouldn't weigh so much. So yeah.
And are all her wigs human hair?
The only one that was human hair was the afro, the natural afro one. All the rest were either yak wigs, so they were made from yak hair, and which is the main component. Whenever you generally make a powdered wig from that period, they're made from yak hair. So the sort of grey, amazing sweepy one that she wears at the presentation at the beginning was yak hair. Okay. And also we used another one, a whiter yak hair. We used that on various times, and all the rest were actually nylon. They were fake hair, but you get the nylon hair wigs are so amazing these days that you get ones that you can use heat on. So what we used to do was we would crimp. We used really, really tiny crimpers. We would crimp the wig first and then set them on rollers, and the crimp stays in. So it gives it that feel that it looks like it's made of yak. So it takes away the shine and it gives it that look. And, if you did that, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, your wig would just literally have melted in front of you. But they're made so brilliantly these days that they can use, take that kind of heat on them. So, so all the rest were generally nylon. Yeah, and there were some that we bought. Actually, there was a couple more that were real hair. I think the sort of pink purple one that she wears at the end of episode 3 was real hair as well.
Okay, for those wigs, I mean, are you just buying those off the shelf, or are you having them made for you?
A mixture of. There were some we bought off the shelf, and a lot of them were just in. Most of them were in my general stock. But yes, originally they were just off the shelf. Yeah,
that's amazing. And she's always, not always, but she has her ladies with her a lot of the times too that have kind of semi-matching hairstyles, don't they? So
yes, I mean,
fun, her entourage.
Talk about make a rod for your own back. Again, that was my idea. The guys in the crowd room, I was like, I just thought it'd be a really good idea that, because she's, bored, that she would want her ladies in waiting to look the same too. So maybe, and they would be like, oh, what are you doing to us? More work. But they kind of loved it too. So they would always come back. It was so nice doing that this week because there's one scene where she has this. Generally, she had either 2 or 4 ladies in waiting, but there's that great shot where you've got all 6 of them, and each one has a dog on their lap, and the queen is in the middle.
Is that where they have the darker kind of roots going out to?
Yes. Yeah.
Lighter. Yeah, that was very stunning.
Again, they were shop-bought ones that had a darker root. And then what we would do is they came with a lace front, and we basically took the lace front away and turned them into a hard front as they would be from that time. So you would basically turn the front under, and we would sew that there was wire in galloon, and you would sew that on to create that hard front. And then we had this great guy called Andrew in the crowd room who was, he knots all the time. He's a wig maker, and he would basically re-knot the fronts. So what it would do is he would use the lighter hair and knot it in front of the darker shade. So you would still get the dark coming through, but it wasn't as dark as it would have been if we just used the whole thing. And then it gave that lovely thing that gave you depth, which was probably technically not right, because if they were yak wigs, they wouldn't have that colour, but it just gave it a little depth and
but they look amazing.
And it looked good.
It was almost like an illusion. It's just like you look at them and be like, I see that depth in there, but where is it coming from? So it's very cool. Yeah.
And then obviously we would powder them as well, because they would be powdered at the time. So generally in a movie, when you've got a powdered wig, rather than actually using powder, you always just tend to use dry shampoo, because it comes out and instantly whitens the hair, but it's just an easier way of putting it on, and then it just gives you that lovely powdered look at the time.
Nice. Good trick. I just love, it was brilliant how you're able to kind of create looks with a nod to historical, like the period, and honor heritage and natural textures at the same time. Just to be able to throw all of that into the same project is awesome. It was just so much fun
Yeah.
to see. I loved it.
You could just go totally period and totally normal and then you just feel like, well, will it just look like every other, costume drama you've seen before? Or can we make it, because the whole thing about Bridgerton is it's not your average costume drama. It's very saucy and, has so many different elements. I also loved, obviously, the way that with the music, they took modern songs and turned them into a sort of Regency version, which, I didn't know they were going to, you don't know those things when you're filming it. And it just brought so much, I think, to everything, the costumes, the sets, the makeup, the actors, the performances. It's brilliant how it all, melds together at the end.
Yeah, it's really awesome. So. I saw a meme the other day that was saying to not watch Bridgerton with your family.
Yes.
Don't watch it with your parents.
I have said that to quite a few friends. I've been like, oh, whatever you do, don't watch it with the kids, or don't watch it with your mum. Or
might get a little awkward because it gets a little steamy.
Especially episode 6.
I love how you know which episode it is, but they certainly build up to it, and then you're just like, oh, okay, that's turning into this kind of show. This is hilarious.
Well, also because when you have things like that with Daphne and Simon, unless you're looking at, because obviously whenever you film those scenes, they have to be a closed set because, the naked, and so unless you're looking after Daphne or Simon, you're not on set for any of those scenes. So I was like, obviously I've read the script, but I wasn't expecting exactly to see exactly what I saw. So I was a bit like, just like you were, anyone else was at home. I literally wasn't expecting a lot of the shenanigans that went on. So,
I think that's awesome. Just across the board when you're working on stuff, though, if there are certain scenes or like chunks of film or TV that you were not present for because you didn't have a character in those scenes, and then when you actually get to watch it and you're like, oh, that's what was going on, this is cool. So you're seeing it for the first time, which is delightful because you can't always say that,
And also for me, running the department, even if I had characters in a certain scene, quite often, because our main cast, we had I think we had something like 130 main cast. So as you're going along, you're constantly fitting new people. So I would, make up my people. I could have 4 or 5 people on set, but I would then have to go back to the bus and either do a fitting with somebody else, or I would be making hair pieces for Cressida for the next ball, or so there was always that ongoing thing. And also that was the same with everyone had to do it to a certain amount, but with Adam, because like I said, we decided at the beginning that she would have a different look every time. There was always something for him to make, and he would always be cursing me because I'd be like, oh, this one's got 4 wigs also, because I don't know if I said earlier the Beyonce wig was 5 wigs sewn together, and each one. So we bought Afro wigs, but then Adam straightened them out. And then we reset them on kebab sticks, which takes an awful lot of time. When you've got 4 wigs all to be set, and then they're brushed out and then sewn on one on top of each other. So Adam spent an awful lot of time on the bus cursing me. But I knew he loved, like, each time I would be like, but you do love that look, really. But he'd be like, yes, but I'm not doing one like that again.
I think it gives you some type of like trauma. Like you need to go to therapy to be like, I really loved it, and at the time, it looked amazing, the end product, and I'm proud, but I never ever want to do that again. It's so funny how that can happen. Well, someone's got to be a trailer troll and hang out and get all the stuff done. I mean, goodness. That's so amazing. Hey, now I wanted to ask you, did you want to give a shout out to your amazing team?
Yes, I would love to. So my amazing, amazing supervisor, Linda, who looked after Daphne mainly. So, she was literally on set all day long with Daphne, and sometimes she would have 5 or 6 hair and makeup changes throughout the day, as well as helping me run the department. So to my fabulous Linda J. Pierce, she always lets me to leave the J in. She was fabulous. To Claire Matthews, Adam James Phillips, Tanya Cooper, Lubanal, juniors and trainees, Georgia, Holly, Emily, Katie Pierce, Katie Finch, and then to my crowd and the fabulous Amy Mansfield was running crowd with Sarah, Hilary Wayne, and Mariana. It's awful. You don't want to leave anyone out, do you? Mariana and Olivia and Ava and Amber. So, yes, that was our huge team. But, yes, they were all brilliant, and I'm so proud of them all. They just made it look amazing, and I keep telling them so much. So, yeah, I'm really proud of them.
Yay. And, yeah, a lot to be proud of. I mean, I've been seeing it pop up on social media so much. I'm based in LA and part of the, hair and makeup union over here, and we have, a Facebook group. And there's been a lot of chat on that as well. Everybody just absolutely loving it. So it's really nice to see other artists, praising your work. Yeah. It's very cool.
Yes, I feel really charmed actually. So yes, it was a great job to do.
That's so cool. So can we look forward to a season 2?
There is, I believe, a season 2. I think it's in early production at the moment. But yes, I think the plan is to have 8 seasons. So because there are 8 books, and each book basically centers around each one of the children. So book 1 was Daphne, book 2 is Anthony, book 3 is Eloise. So each one's story comes to highlight in each book. Not that I've read them.
No.
I should. I'll keep it.
Well, we probably don't need to now. I mean, they're going to make the TV show. No. It's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Marc. It's just been so much fun chatting with you.
Oh, likewise.
Congrats on the success of your show.
Thank you. I'm very proud of it.
For links to see more about our guests, go to our Instagram at The Last Looks Podcast or our website, thelastlookspodcast.com. If you want to keep up with new episodes being released, be sure to subscribe through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, Google Play, YouTube, or any podcast streaming platform. And remember, if you're enjoying the show, share it. The Last Looks Podcast would like to thank Brett Stanley and Sabrina Castro. The song Fun Time by DJ Quads. Thanks for listening. Until next time.
That's a wrap, people.